Fear, love, and anger are some of the emotions we normally think of as driving human behavior. But if you really want to understand human behavior, there's another emotion that quietly drives more of our daily choices than we realize: disgust. Disgust isn't just about avoiding gross stuff like spoiled food or bad smells. It's actually one of the most powerful forces in shaping public health. From whether we wash our hands, to how or if we talk about sexual health, to whether a community will adopt a safe sanitation technology, disgust has always been in the background, steering our decisions. So, why is disgust so powerful? Disgust evolved as a kind of protective shield. Psychologists describe it as one of our first defenses against pathogens. Paul Rozin, who is a leading expert in disgustology, which, yes, is a real thing, once called disgust the guardian of the mouth, because so many of our disgust reactions are about what we refuse to let enter our bodies. Once we label something as contaminated, our brains won't easily let it back into the safe category, right? Like, imagine a cockroach just fell into my mug right now. Even if I plucked it out, I'm probably not going to finish this cup of tea. And I'm betting that you probably wouldn't either, and I don't think most people would. The disgust lingers. But crucially, disgust is not just a personal reaction, it's also a social one. Mary Douglas, who's a famous anthropologist, once called dirt matter out of place. In other words, disgust is not just about hygiene, it's also about cultural rules being broken. As a Canadian, one example that springs to mind is our neighbors to the south wearing their shoes indoors. It's not necessarily dangerous, but it feels wrong to many of us. This is important though, because it means that disgust is both biological and cultural, which makes it one of the most powerful levers for changing health behavior. And public health campaigns have been using it, sometimes successfully and sometimes disastrously, for decades. Let's look at a few examples. First, venereal disease campaigns. There have been countless examples of where this has gone completely wrong across the world. But the example that I'm thinking of is during World War II. There were campaigns directed at soldiers in the US and the UK mainly. Soldiers were bombarded with posters warning them about the dangers of sexually transmitted infections. Many of these posters depicted women as diseased, dangerous, and contaminated. The message was clear: if you slept with the wrong person, you would be tainted. These campaigns worked in the short term. They used disgust and fear to make soldiers avoid risky behavior. But they also caused enormous harm. They stigmatized women, they reinforced gender stereotypes, and they failed to actually encourage safer or healthier long-term sexual behavior. The disgust was directed at people, not the disease. My second example is behavior change associated with hand washing, because we have some interesting data from Sub-Saharan African schools. When schools introduced campaigns using disgust, like showing children images of invisible germs glowing on their hands after using the toilet, hand washing rates went up dramatically. Even simple nudges, like painting footprints from latrines to sinks, helped link the act of toileting with the need to wash. Companies like Lifebuoy soap have leaned heavily into the germs are gross message. And in these cases, disgust paired with a visible solution actually worked. So this is the other part of the equation. Disgust is powerful, but only if people have a way to act on it. Telling children that their hands are dirty only motivates them if soap and water are actually available, or if there's hand sanitizer nearby. Finally, I want to talk about pit latrines in India under the Swachh Bharat mission. Open defecation was not only an issue of poverty, but also of cultural ideas around purity and pollution. Now, this is super interesting, but incredibly complicated. So I'm going to touch on a few of the broader points here, but I'd encourage you to look into it yourself too, if you're as fascinated by it as I am. Many households built toilets but didn't use them. Latrines were considered unclean, especially when the pits were dug close to homes. But there were also broader concerns about safety, because latrines were actually dangerous. Sometimes people would have to empty the latrines with buckets by hand, literally jumping into the sludge to empty them. They would often leach into nearby water sources, causing contamination. And then there were even school kids falling into pit latrines and suffocating. But fear of these serious consequences alone didn't cause behavior change. Campaigns tried to combat this by focusing on the shame and disgust of open defecation. And in some places, it worked. But in others, it reinforced existing caste stigma, associating toilets with lower groups and making them even less acceptable. The takeaway from these examples is that disgust messaging is never neutral. It has to be carefully designed with cultural context in mind, or it can backfire. So why does disgust work where rational arguments fail? Because rational health messages, like germs cause disease, don't trigger immediate behavior change. They require processing and reflection and a willingness to act on information. Disgust, on the other hand, is visceral. It happens instantly. You feel it in your gut, not in your head. That's why disgust can motivate faster and more strongly than logic ever will. But it also means that if it's misapplied, like if it's directed at people instead of at behaviors, it can do lasting harm. Disgust reminds us that people aren't information machines. We are emotional creatures first, and emotions dictate whether we'll wash our hands, or build a latrine, or avoid risky behavior. So what can we do with this knowledge in our own lives? First, use your own disgust reflex to your advantage. If you want to quit a bad habit, don't just tell yourself it's unhealthy. You already know that. Make it gross. Imagine a cigarette not as a sleek object, but as a roll of tar and rotting lungs. This is why, here in Canada, cigarette packets will show gruesome images of the health effects of smoking, like amputations due to peripheral vascular disease or other tissue damage due to various cancers. Public health campaigns do this all the time, and you can reclaim the technique for yourself. Second, design your environment for your intended behavior. We keep soap on the sink where we'll see it immediately when we need it. But you can do the same with all of your other habits. My active books and journals live on my bed. My pull-up bar is in my door frame. My laundry that is constantly piling up lives between my bed and my door, so I see it every single day. Everything I want to attend to on the regular is within reach or within sight all the time. When the cues are right in front of us, these links stay active. Third, be mindful of stigma. It's tempting to use disgust against people, but this almost always backfires. You have to direct it at behaviors, not identities. Campaigns that target dirty hands are effective. Campaigns that target dirty people are not. And fourth, I think it's important to link disgust to dignity. The best health campaigns don't just say, this is gross. They also say, and here's how you can be proud, respected, and clean instead. Schools that pair the idea of dirty hands with clean hands mean respect, confidence, and success see much higher adoption rates. So what's the bigger reflection here? Disgust has been called the most human of emotions. So it makes us gag at spoiled food or recoil from a dirty club bathroom. But it also carries moral weight. It decides who we label as dirty, who we consider clean, and what practices are considered acceptable. That power can save lives, but it can also divide societies, which means the challenge isn't just to harness disgust, but to aim it carefully at the systems and the behaviors that undermine dignity, not at cultures and the people themselves. So the real question isn't about how we avoid disgust, but how we design systems that channel disgust into hygiene and dignity and health for all of us. In summation, disgust has built our immune systems, shaped our cultures, and continues to guide our health choices today. So the next time you reach for hand sanitizer after you touch a dirty doorknob, I hope you'll remember that it wasn't logic that brought you to that decision. It was one of humanity's oldest instincts, keeping you safe, keeping you healthy, and keeping you alive, and shaping your worldview. So thank you for watching.